Rachel Notley joins us now, leader of the Alberta NDP and, of course, former Premier of the province. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us.
Good to be here.
So I wanted to pick up on there what Ron Ambrose was having to say in terms of getting that message out to the world about what Alberta oil can be. As we take a look to what the federal government might have planned, we're not entirely sure, but they say we'll have a green focus. Can Alberta take part in that?
Well, I think that Alberta has to take part in that. I think that's a critical part of ensuring that we continue to support what is a viable oil and gas industry, and one that has to be positioned authentically as a sustainable and responsible oil and gas industry. And I actually couldn't agree more with the comments that you just ran from Rona Ambrose. I mean, the reality is that we become challenged if the government of Alberta continues to be so resistant and so hostile to meaningful efforts to ensure that our industry is acting responsibly and producing the greenest and the lowest carbon barrel of oil that we can. And I know that there is tremendous capacity within the industry to do that. And we need to continue to work on those priorities, make sure that there's a level playing field and consistent incentives for that to happen, and then at the same time reboot our efforts to regain what we had previously begun to establish, which was a tremendous leadership in Alberta on the renewable energy front.
Now, obviously, there are government initiatives, incentives to push companies in that direction, but companies will act of their own accord as well when it comes to just global macro changes in their industry. When you take a look at the big players in the Alberta oil patch, are they making moves independent of government?
Well, I mean, you have definitely seen, for instance, the Cenovus declare that they plan to be carbon neutral by 2050, anyway, but the point is, so they are acting, but we it will happen faster if a clear set of rules and incentives come from the provincial government. And also the provincial government has to be able to present an overarching regulatory framework to international investors, which shows a consistent commitment to ensure that every barrel of oil that comes out of Alberta meets clear environmental standards, and asking industry to do it on a one-off basis is going to potentially undermine the reputation of the industry as a whole. And so we were making great progress on this matter, and unfortunately, as I've said before, the current government has taken steps to significantly undermine our reputation on the international stage, and they really need to reverse course on that as soon as possible.
I mean, do you see that then as the key? When you were Premier, obviously you're trying to sell Alberta's oil to the world. It seems like it's a message that's very hard to get through to the world. It's not just under your government, governments before yours. The message seems to get lost. I mean, what are we not doing right about selling this oil to the world?
Well, I mean, my view, perhaps self-aggrandizing that it may be, is that I think we were actually starting to make progress in terms of delivering that message when we had the climate leadership plan in place, when we were making massive gains in terms of promoting and growing the renewable energy sector in Alberta, where we were establishing very clear guidelines and expectations with respect to reducing the amount of carbon in a barrel, and also with respect to methane. We were moving very quickly, and we were able, and we had gained the support and the validation from stakeholders and opinion leaders who wouldn't normally have been speaking up in favor of the reliability of the sustainability of Alberta's product. Unfortunately, we've lost some of that because we've got a government that literally used the pandemic as a means of arbitrarily eliminating basic safety and environmental standards for oil sand producers in the middle of a pandemic. And that was incredibly damaging. There was no need for that kind of silliness. And many of the changes that they've made at the AER are having similar effects. And so we need to back away from that and go back to this position of actually being a leader on many environmental fronts, and not just talking, but showing and having something real to show. It's that simple. If you do that for a few years, people will get that you mean it. If you back away from it because of outdated ideological politics, well, then unfortunately, it's the industry, and most importantly, from my perspective, the workers who rely on the success of that industry and the citizens of this country who rely on the success of that industry, they're the ones that are hurt in the long run.
I've only got about a minute left with you, but I did want to get your take on the current fiscal situation for Alberta. Understandable. All the provinces, the federal government, seeing the same thing. Costs go up, revenues go down. How does the province get themselves out of that hole eventually?
Well, I think what we need to do is, first of all, is learn from history. And by history, what I mean is the year immediately preceding the one we just heard about last week. The first 12 months of Jason Kenney's time in government, we saw the annual report sort of hidden under the talk about the deficit for this year. And that serves as a report card on the no jobs economic plan that was already in place. And we saw a $12 billion deficit, essentially a doubling of the deficit from where it was when we last delivered a budget. We saw the economy shrink. We saw 50,000 jobs lost. So this idea of just continuing to give corporate tax cuts with no other plan, no focus on diversification, eliminating strategic incentives for certain industries that we know we have the ability to grow and actually make progress on with respect to diversification, that plan wasn't working. So going forward, as we deal with the real problems that we face, we must revisit that and focus on investing in economic growth and growing our way out of the fiscal challenges that, frankly, all Canadians face.
Well, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you.
Rachel Notley, of course, leader of the Alberta NDP and the former premier of that province.